there's just not a lot of actual debate or combat or discourse in media today. Like if I hosted a cable television show, I would be purposefully trying to do what Piers Morgan does, for example. It's very interesting when he has serious people on from different perspectives and they argue with each other. The Trump dynamic has shifted that significantly, where there's not a lot of room for people who aren't mostly on board with Trump. People are going in the heat of the moment and this pendulum is swinging, and you can do a lot of damage and destruction to the system that you will regret. Trump shouldn't defy the Supreme Court, because if he can do it, the people you don't like can do it, and then you don't have a check and balance on presidential authority. I just want to ask conservatives, like, you realize President AOC could deport all the pro-Israel students under that same logic.
We have very different viewpoints on many things.
But a lot of these issues are American issues. They're not Republican or Democrat issues.
Welcome back to Elevated Thoughts, the podcast that's working to restore productive discourse between left and right. I'm your host, Cooper Simmons, and that's my producer and co-host, Mike Marrow. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Brad Polumbo, journalist and political commentator who hosts the podcast Brad versus Everyone, among other podcasts like Citation Needed alongside Colin Wright. So, Brad, we're really grateful to have you. How are you, my friend?
Hey, yeah, it's good to be with you. Quite a mission that you've bitten off for yourselves, restoring conversation between left and right. I mean, it's much needed, but difficult task to say the very least.
Well, just a recent tweet of yours, right? You said how the media is boring these days, and there's not enough dynamic conversations between people who disagree, and
Well, if you
try
want
to
to know
find it.
you want to know the tea on that tweet, that was that was a subtweet of a lot of people, because listen, I am not so I'm on the center right politically, but my background and my career is in right-wing media, conservative media, as I've always worked more in right-wing media spaces. So I have a lot of very high-profile connections who are right-wing TV hosts or big podcasters or YouTubers who, throughout the Biden presidency, I would do a lot of their shows to criticize Biden, criticize DEI, criticize the border crisis, criticize bad economic policies and the like. But since Trump has taken over and I've been very critical of some of his policies, I've reached out to a whole lot of them being like, hey, let's talk about this. I think you're really wrong for defending this. And with one or two notable exceptions, I've gotten a lot of crickets, frankly, because
Yeah.
I think some of them are afraid to actually. There's just not a lot of actual debate or combat or discourse in media today. Like if I hosted a cable television show, I would be purposefully trying to do what Piers Morgan does, for example, although maybe I would be slightly more judicious with my choice of guests, because he sometimes has people on who are buffoons. But it's very interesting when he has serious people on from different perspectives and they argue with each other. It can get too chaotic at times, but I would be trying to do that. Even just from the ratings perspective, I think that brings the ratings. But a lot of these people are, I think, too afraid because they know that they're saying things they don't really believe, or that they're stretching things. And so I haven't gotten too many callbacks lately from my friends in right-wing media, but that's okay. That's just the business. And luckily enough, like you mentioned, I do my own podcast and my own thing, and am independently self-sustaining with that.
Yeah, man. Well, we saw your content and saw you as this centrist, of course, right-leaning, and it's great. I think it's better actually when you kind of assign a left or a right to yourself. It's a little bit, in my opinion, a cop-out if you'd say, "Oh, I'm not affiliated or an independent," But we saw that your pragmatism and your intellectual honesty was on display, and said that perfectly fits our mission. We got to get this guy on here. But one of the difficulties that we've been experiencing is it's really tough to grow an audience and gain traction with a following if you're not doing what we're kind of describing, this audience capture, shock jock kind of extremism, frankly. So how did you get into this, and how did you change your stance, right, from a right-wing media pundit to kind of someone who is willing to say, hey, GOP, it's not it?
Well, I actually think I've always kind of been that, but that right-wing media has just traditionally been more, at least in the last decade or so that I've been in this business. Going beyond that, I can't say, but right-wing media has always been a bigger tent than liberal media, and I'm speaking in broad strokes here, but I do believe this is true. When I worked at a conservative magazine, there were traditionalist, religious, social conservatives, there were socially moderate neoconservatives, there were libertarians, and then there were people somewhere in between all three of those things, all kind of working in one space, shared a fair amount of things we disagreed with, but had actually quite different views. Whereas in many liberal media institutions, something like New York Times, NPR, Washington Post, these kinds of places, maybe it's changed a little bit, but if you go back even just a couple of years, there was a very much hive mind mentality. People were driven out for airing different views. I mean, I know, I've met once or twice Adam Rubinstein, whose only
Oh
offense
wow.
was publishing an op-ed by a sitting US senator about you send in the National Guard to quell riots or what have you, which maybe you strongly object to that opinion, but the purpose of some place like the I actually think that opinion has probably aged not that bad, with all the
Yeah,
destruction and death that ended up happening in some
Sure.
of those riots. But regardless, right? The job of a newspaper is to air controversial opinions of the opinion page, is to air controversial opinions from important people like a sitting US senator. So he just did his job and he was hounded out. They claimed that publishing this article makes black staff unsafe, as if like people need to be protected from words. I've never bought that mentality, but it was always, I think, a little bit more of a big tent in right-wing media. I think the Trump dynamic has shifted that significantly, where there's not a lot of room for people who aren't mostly on board with Trump. You're allowed to kind of quibble with things on the edges,
Right.
but if you just actually think he's unfit, which I categorically do, I think he's unfit to be president, or if you really strongly object to some of the things that he does, unless you're going to go full like resistance liberal and join MSNBC, and suddenly decide that you're, pro-choice, anti-gun, pro-government healthcare for everyone, and just I love Joe Biden now and all this kind of thing, there's not a super convenient home for you. So that's a little bit of an aside, but the the short version, we can go into it more, is I went into college thinking I wanted to be a lawyer, actually, but then I decided, midway through to start dabbling in campus journalism, and I detailed some of this on my own podcast over the years, or in recent months in particular, but I was actually kind of canceled by the student newspaper, but I made enough of a splash that I got hooked on being a little bit contrarian and stirring the pot, and I ended up getting opportunities to work in right of center media while I was still in college, and then those led to full-time positions after college, and then after a couple of years working at different think tanks and media companies, I just went off on my own to do my own content and haven't looked back.
Yeah, that must be liberating, right? Tell us a little bit more, like, about your think tank experience. I wanna hear about that.
So I worked at the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE, which is a free market think tank, a libertarian think tank that does like articles, videos, content creation to spread a certain message of like laissez-faire economics. I've got Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell
Right,
behind me
right.
on this bookshelf. So that gives you an idea of that was what my degree was in, economics. And now I do kind of everything. I do cultural commentary, I do politics and policy, but I still dabble in economics and I speak about it. And it's one of the issues that I'm very fluent in as a journalist because it is my background. And for a while I was specifically doing econ content with them. Ironically enough, and this is not to say any shade at my friends at FEE or anywhere else, but libertarian nonprofits tend to have very robust bureaucracies
Oh, wow.
that
Okay.
slow down and muck up and delay a lot of things. And so everything has to be brand safe. You have to have meetings to approve scripts, and before you know it, the news
Yikes.
item is old. I just want. They also, they don't want to ruffle a donor's feathers by being too edgy or abrasive. It's a great space. They do important work in the nonprofit political space, but it wasn't for me because I wanted to be, I think, just a little more raw, unfiltered, quicker, and a little bit less packaged up and focus grouped.
So, kind of what is the role of the new independent media? And I think it has its good and its bad, but it's certainly very, very influential. I think people are tired of stuffy, as you said, prepackaged, pre-prepared conversations that there was no disagreement that wasn't already programmed into the show already there. So, what kind of is the role of this new media? And also, something do you feel that of the negative aspects, do you feel that there's something different happening? I feel almost like generally is this equilibrium where things might swing a little far to the left or the right, and then after a generation or so, things kind of come back towards the middle. Do you feel that that's changing a little bit? I feel like we're whipsawing very far in each direction, but almost increasing intensity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I describe things as a pendulum swing all the time. I think you can look at so many issues, from social issues like LGBT, where I think people pushed in a very, very progressive into some very controversial territory, and now there's a big backlash that's swinging, I think, in many ways too far in the opposite direction. You can look at things like the hypersensitivity over like racism and microaggression, all this stuff, where they were canceling people who made the okay hand sign in the social media post and getting them fired from their jobs. But now you go on X and you just see actual racism all the time,
Yeah.
just like people posting racism in a non-ironic way.
Yeah.
And so that's also bad. That's a pendulum swing to another extreme. And Elon Musk might retweet it and be like, LOL or something. And I think that actually unfortunately describes the just the nature of culture and politics in America today. And I think what's happened is you're right. It's always there have always been pendulum swings, but it's like it's swinging faster now. It's like
Right.
social media has maybe lubricated the joints of the machine or
Sure.
increased the velocity at which we go back and forth, because maybe it would happen over the course of a decade or 2 decades, in the pre-viral era. Now I feel like it's happening in a year or two, where
Right.
public opinion radically sways on things in a way that is disruptive, to say the least, but actually is part of why one of the things I stand for strongly is this idea of classical liberalism and the system of checks and balances, and that often includes things like that are explicitly counter-majoritarian, that are explicitly anti-democracy. Like, no, I don't care if 60% of people vote for it. You can't have a law banning hate speech unless you can get 90% of the country to agree and do a constitutional amendment. It's not happening
Right.
because this is the same reason I defend things like the Senate filibuster, needing
Hmm.
60 votes to pass consequential legislation. And many of my Democratic friends, when Biden was president, were railing against the filibuster, calling it like the Jim
Right.
Crow filibuster and all this stuff, and saying it's so evil and bad. They sure are happy now that there's still a filibuster and
Exactly.
that they
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
get rid of it to like pass a voting rights bill or raise the minimum wage or something, because Trump, as much as he's doing now, would be doing so much more if he only needed 50 votes to pass most stuff. When in reality, because of the filibuster, he needs 60, which they don't have. So, to me, I'm really trying to focus on pushing people to not be short sighted and to not undermine the things that constrain the passions of the moment, because good policy rarely comes from heated emotional reactions in the immediate aftermath of something. You look at like 9/11 and the Patriot Act,
Yep.
these kinds of things that age very poorly. It tends to be some of the more draconian steps taken during the COVID pandemic. People were so afraid. When you make these decisions that are so sweeping and so drastic based on like emotion maybe you have a lot of people with you in that moment, but you need to stop and you need to take a beat. And some of the checks and balances that are built into our systems to be more deliberative and to slow things down are actually there for a reason. And
Hmm.
during the Biden era, I was criticizing a lot of the people who wanted to blow them up in pursuit of like a Democrat agenda. And now I have to, I find myself weirdly arguing with like MAGA people. Like, actually, no, Trump shouldn't defy the Supreme Court, because if he can do it, the people you don't like can do it. And then you don't have a check and balance on presidential authority. W-
Right.
I feel like this is a problem. Maybe it's a problem of civics education. I don't know why, but people are really, I think, going in the heat of the moment, and this pendulum is swinging, and you can do a lot of damage and destruction to the system that you will regret. I talk about this now. I try to stay out of giving a lot of opinions on foreign affairs because it's not really my lane or my area of expertise. But there's like three things I stand for. Free speech is one of them. So I've talked about some international stuff like Israel Palestine from a free speech perspective. And I draw a clear distinction between people who are like committing crimes who are here in the US. So if you're like doing an encampment, taking over buildings, if
Right.
you're providing material support to Hamas, a designated terror organization, that's one thing. But when you're just canceling people's visas and deporting them, like in the case of Rumesa Ozturk, because she wrote an op-ed criticizing Israel, or when Marco Rubio is saying the federal
Right.
government has the authority to deport anyone whose presence in the United States undermines the foreign policy of the United States government. I just want to ask conservatives, like, you realize President AOC could deport all the pro-Israel students under that same
That's the
logic.
exact comparison I make to people. I was like, "All right, it may seem okay because Trump is your guy and it's your agenda that you want now," but I'm like, "Would you be a little worried when, the AOC Sanders ticket takes the House, next election cycle and they have these same powers that you're worried about?" I think once you cross the Rubicon, as the phrase is, there is no turning back, and I think once, we have enough perspective now with the internet, right? We can see things how they were pre-Patriot Act versus post-Patriot Act, pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Like things don't go back to the way they were. So I
Let
don't
me
know.
let me let me step in though, because I'm the conservative on the show, right? And I do want to comment. Like I'm thinking of the two issues here, right? Like right now we're suspending visas for college students that have wrong think, right? Sure, we agree that's bad. And then we have the deportation, right, where we're eliminating habeas corpus, and Supreme Court said you got to send them, and guys like Matt Walsh are saying no. I would think that in some of these cases, when we're just specifically talking about FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, because the gangs are now that as well, wouldn't it be better to do preemptive or preventative measures against these folks rather than reactively boot these people? Then, right, do we have to wait for them to make an encampment? Do we have to wait for them to burn down a library to say, yeah, you're probably supporting Hamas here? I mean, when someone shows their true colors, aren't we supposed to see them for what they are? Where exactly can we draw the line? Because I really see some of these actions as preventative measures so we don't get to the what if, right? We never knew on 9/11 the means, the method, or the place, or the time, but if we had made a little bit stricter constraints at the airports earlier, maybe we would have prevented a problem. So, do you get what I'm saying, Brad? Is there any feasibility to this to say, listen, they're actually supporting Hamas based on these words, so let's believe them?
Well, I get what you're saying, but I'm always pretty skeptical of the idea of legislating for a possibility or taking actions against somebody for something they could or might do. This almost reminds me of the rhetoric you heard from Democrats during the early in the Biden administration about like far right groups and white
Mm.
nationalist groups and
Right,
how
right.
there's this clip of he was out of government, but I think it was James Clapper or somebody on MSNBC saying like we need to monitor these extremist groups like white supremacists, the Proud Boys, and libertarians, and he just threw that one in there, and I was like,
Yeah.
one of those things is not like the other.
Right, right.
But it's that idea of almost pre-crime, like they could do something bad, so we need to crack down upon them. I think that's a pretty dangerous territory to give the government the authority to start doing because it's pretty hard to defend yourself from an accusation of pre-crime. Now with it really depends, I think, on some legal things that need to be fleshed out with these students. What is the extent of First Amendment protection that legal immigrants are actually entitled to? It is unclear under current Supreme Court precedents. The answer is basically not the same as citizens, but not nothing either. So I think the
Right.
legality of what can your visa be revoked for once you're here is going to be litigated. Now, the question of it it is a tricky question because if they're openly supporting violence, that is one thing, I suppose. I certainly condemn that, and I don't think it's too much to ask that if you come here as a visa holder, you don't come here and, like, start chanting, "Kill the Jews, kill the Jews." But that's not what we're talking about in a lot of these cases, and in some cases, it's also sometimes it's very murky. It's like something like, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Some
Coded
people
And
language,
half the
interpret
yeah.
that,
people chanting it don't even know what it means, right? The protest organizer is the one that's told them to say that. So I'm with you. I understand that. Yeah.
but, like, some people literally interpret that as a call to genocide all of Israel. Some people think we're literally just saying people in Palestine should be free. How do you legislate for that? I mean, free Palestine, something as simple as that statement, some people interpret as like a call to violence. And this goes in the other direction as well. I mean, I just think it's very tricky territory. I don't envy the task of having to sort through all of it. I don't think it's easy, but I think it's just obvious to me that they're going too far. In the same way with, like, for example, when we're talking about the revocation of habeas corpus, you don't actually or sending these alleged gang members to El Salvadorian prisons, where we're paying for them with no charges, no trial, not even telling their lawyers where they're going, their family, even though some of them entered the country legally. I don't think that's actually okay even for illegals, but regardless, I actually think it's even worse for legal immigrants. You don't actually have to. It's funny, when I criticize this, they're like, "Oh, so you want us to release them?" I'm like, "No, you could just keep them in federal immigration facilities here in the US, you know, not send them to El Salvador, where you're saying you can't get them back also?" Like, the Trump
Yeah, that is
administration is
damning.
claiming they can't get Kilmar Abrego Garcia back. I actually don't believe them. I think if they really wanted to, they probably could,
For
but
sure.
they're saying that they can't get people back once they send them to this El Salvador jail, and yet they're sending people there still in additional numbers. That to me is not okay to do when we're talking about people who were not charged with a crime, who were not given a trial of any kind. They weren't deported. People are like, "Oh, we deported them." No, deportation is when you send someone back to their home country. We're sending people to be jailed in a country that is not their home nation. So these are a lot of these people are Venezuelan. They're being sent to El Salvador. Now that's partly because Venezuela won't accept deportations. They won't accept people we're sending back to them, but still, we're sending them to a foreign nation and then we're paying the El Salvadorian government to imprison them in, like, a very horrifying prison, not a normal prison.
Right.
That you don't have to do that to, like, make sure these people can't go commit a terror attack. I know that was a very roundabout way to getting to your point, but your concern is not lost on me that we don't want potential members of Tren de Aragua in our country, and we shouldn't have to wait till they do something bad, but we also don't have to send them to, like, a dystopian prison either. I
I
feel like
think
we could just put them on a boat to Venezuela or just drop them in
Oh,
Latin America somewhere, like
or how about this? Preserve due process. I mean, that's the easiest suggestion. So yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
yeah.
It's a great answer, Brad. Yeah.
No, I think it's funny. Here I am, the left of center guy, and I really enjoyed you highlighting the coverage that was made by, I believe it was Brian Breyer. I hope I'm not butchering his name, but a gentleman named Breyer, I think his last name was, the Cato Institute report that he was
Oh, it's
recovering a lot.
David Beer, yeah.
David Beer, sorry, I'm butchering names. We'll make sure we get that right. But David Beer, he was highlighting that, and I think you take that into context with the Supreme Court decision, the 7-2, saying that the administration just kind of needs to slow down. I think that's what gets lost in all of this. And as you said before, right, good policy doesn't emerge from emotionally charged arguments. And I think that's what gets lost here is, we want a secure border. We certainly don't want criminal members here. But
Mhm.
then once you push this envelope, you keep pushing it farther and you keep pushing it farther. And as you could see, a lot of those folks in the Cato Institute report sample showed that they shouldn't be deported, at least not without some other trial. And then I think what was really alarming to me was, and I hate the sycophancy that JD Vance has essentially just, succumbed to. It used to be someone of more character, I thought, but he'll sit there on an interview with in mainstream media saying that, oh, I don't want to talk too much about this for national security reasons, but the Supreme Court should really be deferential to the presidency. And it goes back to that whole checks of, power. And I just can't imagine if Biden or any one of his, spokespersons in his administration would said, the Supreme Court just needs to be more deferential to the president. I feel like everyone would lose their mind, right? If
Well,
anyone in the
yes, and
sense.
it's funny because people are acting as if we have some sort of liberal activist Supreme Court, when in
Yeah.
fact, we have a Republican-appointed majority comprised of many of the same justices who overturned Roe v. Wade. Need I
Right.
remind you? And now these justices are, in some cases, going against Trump, and the response is if, "Oh, I guess these justices were secret libs all along in some corners," in, like, the cat turd, sector of Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, oh
That one
that's the
caught me
name
because
of a
that's
for people who don't know, that's the name of a very prominent MAGA influencer. His name is Cat
and
Turd.
it's the influenced cohort. They're not informed, they're the influenced. So I got
Yes.
that one got me. I love that.
But they're like, "Oh, I guess Amy Coney Barrett was a liberal all along," and it's like, no, she literally overturned Roe v. Wade. Maybe
Yeah.
it's that Trump has gone too far because even justices who are appointed by his own side of the aisle and lean conservative in their jurisprudence are ruling against him. And the other thing is, I get so frustrated because people, when I criticize, like, the Matt Walshes of the world wanting to ignore the Supreme Court, they'll say, "Well, the Supreme Court's trying to stop Trump from doing mass deportations," and that's not even true. They just upheld a huge step where he was able to revoke, status of many Venezuelans who'd been given TPS, temporary protected status. They've upheld him on many occasions. They've just ruled other against him on other occasions where he's gone too far, or he's usurped the role of Congress, or he's gone beyond the proper bounds of executive authority. This is not if you truly had a totally obstructionist liberal Supreme Court, I would at least be more sympathetic to the argument that you have to try to work around them in some way, but you don't have that. And then also there's just a lot of, like, misperceptions. For example, I criticized Matt Walsh and his take because what that case concerned was the Supreme Court ruling that Trump could not continue to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to deport people without due process. And they said he can use the Alien Enemies Act, but there needs to be at least more than 24-hour notice. Um, and Matt Walsh, who clearly did not read the decision and just read a couple paragraphs of a news story before dedicating, a huge swath of his show that millions of people
Sure.
watch to it, um, he told them that he told his audience that the Supreme Court's basically saying Trump can't do mass deportation. Now, mind you, back in reality, the Alien and Enemies Act only applies to a few hundred people, right? Of the millions of people Trump is eligible to deport under normal federal laws, this is about a very small, specific subgroup who are accused of being members of Tren de Aragua, and he's invoking the Alien Enemies Act. But I forget the exact number because this was a week or two ago now, but I think it's less than 100, maybe it was like 70, maybe it was 200, I don't remember exactly. But I'm saying we're talking about he wants to deport like 11 million people,
Right.
and you're portraying the Supreme Court sending it back down for lower court review to discuss further what process needs to take place before you can invoke this act and deport this couple of hundred people. You're framing that as woke Supreme Court blocks Trump from doing mass deportations. It's like, I don't know if they're just if they actually don't understand these things or if they're just, like, knowingly lying and being
Well, Brad,
inflammatory. I don't
you,
know.
you, you know what it is? It's don't say gay, right? It's the don't say gay bill in Florida. Don't say gay. Now you can't say gay. You read the
Which
bill. It's
wasn't
not
really how it worked. Yeah.
exactly. It's not even in there. So what's happened? Like, yeah, these pundits are pushing these headlines, and that's what's getting the clicks. I mean, I do think it's deliberate. I think that it's gone to this audience capture level where he probably did read the bill, honestly. Like, he's pretty informed, smart guy, and he knows that this is only concerning under 200 people, and he's purposely masturbating to his group of 9 million people because it works and he got a lot of clicks from it. But that brings me to something that I did want to ask because, right, we have the conservative Supreme Court, the conservative executive, Congress, everything. Where exactly how exactly do we define conservatism anymore? We saw Trump and Republicans run on this platform of balancing the books, reducing the budget, and now we've got the big beautiful bill to kill our deficit, destroy us. I think you made a great comparison on your show to if my grandparents took out a credit card in my name and then expected me to pay it. This is what's happening here. Meanwhile, we're Xing out everything, no pun intended, that Elon Musk and Doge did. We're crossing that out. We're bringing everything back. And no one's really speaking up for this except for a couple of your libertarian cohorts. So, what the heck is a conservative? Am I even a conservative anymore?
You know, unfortunately, I'm not sure the word conservative has a whole lot of meaning anymore. When I first entered politics, there was still some strains of the idea of fusionism, the idea from the Ronald Reagan era of Republican politics, where what it meant to be a conservative or Republican was kind of a fusion of social conservatism, more hawkish, aggressive foreign policy, and then a somewhat strong adherence to laissez-faire free market libertarian economics. That was what like a Reagan Republican meant. That's what it meant to be a conservative in the 1980s, 90s, and maybe early 2000s. And that really did, I think, start to fall apart in the Bush era because he was in some of those things, and then some of those things very much not. He was very much not a real free market guy. Uh,
Right, right.
but I think Trump really came in and blew up the whole thing. He actually blew up all 3 prongs. He
Yeah.
blew up the foreign policy because and sometimes I agree with some of the things he said, though like I told you, that's not my lane. He came in bashing foreign wars, bashing nation building, saying America first, all this stuff that is, you know, a lot of people agree with it. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's quite different than what it traditionally meant to be a conservative, where you were like hawkish, the Liz Cheney approach, or even a less extreme version of that. But still, this interventionist idea of America in the world. Trump blew that up. The social conservatism, Trump kind of blew that up. Now he adopted parts of it, like pro-life and pro-Christian in different ways, but he was supportive of gay marriage. He was a philanderer, an adulterer openly, not socially conservative in his personal life, hung out with like rappers and just so he kind of blew up the social conservatism of it all, though maintaining certain specific issues where he continued to appease that base. So they're still part of his coalition. But, and then he also blew up the idea of laissez faire economics because he did some things in his first presidency that were more traditionally free market that I supported, like his tax cuts, like a lot of his deregulation. And I think that's why the economy was mostly good under him until COVID. But his trade policies are just a total break with, and again, I disagree with them, but I'm not even saying right or wrong. I'm just saying it's a total break with what it meant to be a Republican or conservative. They were always the free traders, and it was the progressives who were like more protectionist. And even on domestic policies, he loves to spend money. He loves to, we're going to have a big, beautiful military. We're going to have a massive parade. He presided over tremendous deficits. He signed into law some of the biggest spending bills ever imagined. Now he says things that are still somewhat appeal to the idea of fiscal conservatism, but he doesn't actually do that much of them. He does something very different with his actions when he's president. Both last time, where he signed massive bloated budget bills and ran huge deficits, though he did stuff I liked too. It wasn't all bad. I supported a fair amount of it, but then this time where he's coming in and he literally said, "We'll balance the budget," and now he's just signing bills that will add trillions of dollars to the deficit. And people who are saying otherwise are just not being honest with themselves. Like it's just objectively true that if you massively decrease taxes and then don't decrease spending by an equivalent amount, you will have much bigger budget deficits. It's just basic math. So I think
According to the woke CBO, right?
yes, but also just according to everyone. Like
Yeah,
you can't
right,
actually
right.
find an analysis other than like a fake one where they put in totally unrealistic numbers for economic growth
We're gonna have
to try to juice the
100%
numbers.
GDP.
They say we're gonna have 5.5% economic growth. And so the economy will be so big and roaring that it will cancel out the lost revenue through new jobs that don't exist yet. And it's fantasy math, right? Even if the economy was booming, you might have 3.5% growth. You're not going to have 5.5%. Totally unrealistic. I'll eat my words if I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not wrong. So all of that's to say, I have no idea what it means to be a conservative anymore. I barely even know what it means to be a Republican because these labels and these
Yeah.
groups, I think it's kind of good to be a big tent. For a long time, Democrats weren't a big enough tent, but Republicans are almost like too big a tent where now it doesn't really mean anything. Like, other than you don't like woke stuff and you like edgy comedy. I'm not really sure there's much that unifies people who what do Dave Portnoy and like a traditional social conservative have in common other than that they voted for Trump? I
Right.
Mhm.
I don't really know.
So do you feel, and this is usually what happens with kind of confederations like that, right? It's a matter of convenience, but they're very loosely tied together. Do you see any fractures in this? Because there are folks who do speak out, but then I'm worried that everyone who's tried to, talk about the emperor's new clothes, he's not wearing any, they are, Teflon Don has been able to kinda finish any career of anybody who's put criticism towards them, and it's weird because I find myself agreeing with the folks of, like, Shapiro, Thomas Massie, and now even our good new friend here, Brad, and I just don't think, do we have enough influence? Are we fighting a losing battle, or should we just die with dignity because we have to? We should keep speaking up.
Well, it's easy for me because I've never considered myself a partisan operative. So people would sometimes hit me with, like, if I wrote something criticizing a Republican in my days in right wing media, they'd be like, how does this help Republicans win elections? And I'd be like, you and I have fundamentally different ideas of what it is I do here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not my
Yeah.
job. I don't care about, I mean, I have my preferences. I vote, but I'm saying
Sure.
my job as a political commentator and journalist who gives my opinion is to attack truth and say what I
Yeah.
think is right. It's not to like help one side get elected. If I wanted to do that, I'd work in PR and or in
Uh,
consultancy, and frankly, I'd probably make a
sure.
lot more money, though I do just fine for myself. So there's that. So I think people should call it out. I also think that there are factions inside, for example, like even this current White House. You have people who are like tech bros, pro growth, pro capital, pro skilled immigration. Then you have people who are nationalists, who are populists, who hate all immigration, even skilled legal immigrants who don't want trade. And that's almost like there's the people who say, this is a good litmus test, actually. There's the people who argue that Trump's goal with his tariffs is to get to freer trade. Now, I don't think that's true, but that's what they want is freer trade. They're like, we're going to put tariffs and then get them to lower theirs, and the end result will be more free trade. But then you have the people in the Trump coalition who actually want less trade. They actually want to decouple from other economies, the Stephen
Yep.
Millers, the Steve Bannons of the world, because they have almost a Peronist idea of economics. And that is an important behind the scenes struggle that's happening in this White House. But I will say, I think the nationalists and populists have mostly won. Not entirely, but I think they've mostly won. In the first Trump term, more of the old guard, more of the pro-growth, the more Wall Street Journal types had a lot more say and a lot more influence than this time around. And personally, with my ideological preferences and policy preferences, I don't view any of that as a positive development, but, uh, that's my analysis of the state of play. I definitely think that side is winning.
Yeah. Well, we've spoken to enough experts that have broken down this tariff question to say, he's got his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talking out of one side of his face saying this is leading towards free trade. They're going to drop their tariffs, but then he says in another interview that we're going to make trillions of dollars on revenue for the United States by keeping these tariffs around. So it's just a very strange debate, and the same thing's happening with this big beautiful bill. I was listening to the All In podcast, and I really like those guys. They have a balanced panel, in my opinion. But you had last week David Sachs and Chamath Palihapitiya kind of going head to head saying, Chamath is going, this is a bad bill. Like, there's no other way to look at this. This one's going to cost us a hell of a lot of money, and it's a bad bill. And Sachs, who's in the White House now, is saying, well, you can't expect to get it all done in one bill. You have to take the tax off the tips and tax off overtime first, and then they come back and do the rest of it. But this brings me back to like when Matt Gaetz put the stick in the spokes to stop the election of Kevin McCarthy, like the whole thing, the best thing he did was stop omnibus bills. And what's happened since then is the bills have gotten less frequent and way bigger.
More
Like
omnibusy.
exactly. I don't even know what omnibus means, except it's huge bill that's bad and costs us money. Like, how do we break out of this? Because the power that's given to this party, they abuse it no matter what. So is it podcasts like ours, or is it like writing senators emails and saying, guys, please don't do that? I don't see a way out of this.
Well, I can try to explain a way out of it, though I'm not actually that optimistic, but I will just say something kind of funny and kind of quaint. Do you know that they used to pass a different budget bill for each department of the federal government? So they would do, I don't know, 12, 15 different budget bills. Okay, we're gonna vote to authorize the Pentagon budget for this year. We're gonna go through
Right.
every element of it. It's gonna have markups, hearings. This is, we're dedicating these 3 weeks to the Pentagon budget. Now we're gonna do the Department of Education. And they would go through this. That is how Congress is supposed to work. And as a result, at every level of that, people could challenge specific parts of the funding and say, this is a waste, or why don't we do this with this instead? What happens now is they roll all of it out combined in one massive package that in some cases, I think they've actually made the rules a little bit better about this, but they used to hand them a 2,000-page bill like the night before the vote, even just a few years ago. I think they
Those
actually did
those
negotiate
poor,
for like,
poor staffers.
yeah, they did negotiate for like 72 hours now or something. It's improved a little bit, but it's still ridiculous. So and then what they do is they hold you hostage with this omnibus
Right.
because if you vote against it because the process is terrible or you haven't even had time to read it or there's things inside it that are terrible, they'll find the parts of it that everyone agrees with. Like, why do you want to defund the program that matches disabled veterans with puppies? You're
Right,
evil. How
right.
could you vote against this? And so then they hold you hostage on this. And a few people just don't frankly give an F, the Thomas Masseys of the world, but a lot of them do. A lot of them don't want to be accused of voting against CHIPS, the child health insurance program, because they're, not on board with adding $5 trillion to the deficit. Or it's a really sinister and broken way to run government. But how we got here is very complicated. How you would fix it is, you know, a dissertation worthy topic. I think one thing you have to do in Congress is, though, weaken the power of leadership. I'm friendly with somebody who was a member of Congress for many years from this area, and he tells me that basically, if you're a congressman and you're not in leadership or a congresswoman, and you're not in one of these leadership positions and you're in the House of Representatives, your job is to do constituent services and go on television and then show up a couple times a week to vote yes or no on something. And you basically have no power or influence unless you're one of like 5 people in leadership. They decide everything. Doesn't matter if you have a majority of your colleagues want to pass a bill. If leadership doesn't want to bring it to the floor, they don't have to and they won't. And none of that is a sustainable way to run a government. And it's also not a representative way to run a government. So I'm not exactly sure how, but I think you have to break it's not a monopoly, but the kind of like oligopoly that they have, these leadership people have. And then my hot take as well, we need a maximum age on every elected
I
office.
don't think that's
This,
so hot take. Yeah, I think that's
it's
pretty
actually not at all,
reasonable.
but the way that these Democrats keep dying in office, and it's hampering their ability to, like, block Trump bills and nominations is diabolical.
I think it
Of
was th
course,
we're
I'm
3,
like,
right? 3 or 4 now, it's insane.
I don't wanna be glib about anyone's death. I really am sad for their family. I wish them all well, but, like, how are you not retiring before you're 97 and literally dying in office? Why can't you give it up? Are you so addicted and so power hungry? Are you so unfulfilled in your personal life that you can't enjoy your grandkids and your golden years? I guess so. So we need some maximums because there's minimums,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
We already
and I
have
mean,
Right.
I
minimums.
imagine they're grooming their, not grooming in that bad sense, but like, right, they're bringing up their apprentices that they're gonna fill their seats. So it's like, what are you kidding? You can't retire at 97
Well, I
years
think
old.
that's exactly the problem, right? Is there is no grooming of the next generation of either young Democrats. Maybe so. I can actually see it a little bit with Republicans. I think that's what the Trump administration is doing. Hopefully, they've come to their senses and they no longer joke about a potential third term, and they're just not even considering it. But
No,
you
Stephen Miller's just gonna run that kind of administration.
Exactly, but you could see that they are trying to, elevate certain people. I mean, Marco Rubio, there's no doubt about it. He's the head of so many departments and agencies now. But that's a chief problem with the Democrats is they just sit there and they consolidate power until the person who's holding it dies, but with no real, succession planning for that district. And that's exactly what's happening now. So it kind of really kills, any development of expertise. And I think then
Mm.
that's where people just go along to get along. Like, I don't really want to think. I just want to be told yes or no, show up for my vote, go do some fundraising and call it a day.
And what's the argument against a maximum age on any of these offices?
The
White
Seriously.
fact
old
the
people
fact that
wanna
those
keep their
people who are holding
jobs.
them now would have to leave and they don't want to do that.
Right, it's the
But
same
okay,
reason they
well,
can't
what
fix
if
the
we made the
homeless
deal?
crisis.
What if we made the deal that they can be grandfathered in, right? Like, starting in anyone who assumes office for the first time in 2027. these will now apply. So if you're Nancy Pelosi, you may cling to your seat till you literally keel over. Fine, but we stop this insanity. It's it's just ridiculous because the reason we have minimums, I mean, which if anything are pretty high, right? Like having to be, I think
It's like
it's
35.
35 to be,
Yeah.
or
I'm
is it
pretty sure it's
37 to
35.
be
I
president?
I'm
think
not
it's
even
35,
eligible
yeah.
yet. Exactly.
35? And so you're telling me a 33-year-old in amazing health doesn't have enough experience or whatever to be president, but a 95-year-old can be like one of the most important people in the Senate. And we're concerned about people being too young, that their brains aren't fully developed, but not about them being too old, that they decline. One of those things is, if anything, more severe. And we just got a 4-year treatise in which one of them it is with the Biden administration.
Right.
So if you can't agree now that we need a maximum, I mean, I don't know how after what we just lived through. Clearly, he never should have been
Yeah.
eligible to
Does
take office in 2020.
does it speak to us as a citizenry? Because, it was a totally legitimate conversation before Biden's gaffe debate, and it really started to become, aware how, unequipped he was for the job. But I think it was very, very interesting to see, okay, Biden stepped out, and the conversations around age immediately stopped, despite the fact that this current president is going to push into his 80s in office. And I just think, when do we look towards ourselves and we kind of blame ourselves for not holding to account these things?
Well, there's actually, it's funny, I could find it. There's a clip of me in like 2022 on Fox News saying, actually, I think Trump is also too old to be president.
And that was
And I,
the
Right.
last
Right.
I
time you
Yeah.
were ever invited back on, right? No, I'm kidding.
no, it actually wasn't, to their credit. But I could find that clip because I stand by that Trump is also too old. I will say, I don't believe him to be in the same kind of cognitive decline
Sure,
as Biden.
sure.
But if you compare Trump to Trump, if you go back and watch Trump in the
Right?
2016 primary debates, the Republican primary debates, if
Mhm.
you go watch clips of him, I mean, he was so much more sharp and lucid than he is now. I don't think he's like senile or not asleep at the wheel or anything like that, but I think he's definitely lost several steps and is much more muddled than he was in his communication style.
You're right,
I just
right.
think it really shouldn't be partisan. We should all be able to agree that, like, I don't know, maybe it's 75 or 72 or something, but there's got to be an age past which, I mean, if you think about it in your personal life, most people have family members who are in their 80s. And well, with rare exceptions, I actually have a grandfather who's in his nearly 90, is in excellent shape. But with rare exceptions, we like we take them to the grocery store
I was
and
just gonna
walk
say, yeah,
with
we
them and
pick them
hold their,
up for Easter. Yeah.
yeah. I take one of my grandmothers to Costco and I hold her arm and walk her around and get everything for her. And she's much sharper and more lucid than Joe Biden or
Right,
Donald
right.
Trump. Like,
Yeah.
we all know this is a thing. How can we not come together on it and legislate it? Because it's not even partisan. If Democrats had agreed to it 5 years ago or 10 years ago, then they could have avoided Trump at least his second term. And Republicans could have avoided Biden's, asleep at the wheel disaster.
Well, I
Is it
think
truly though? Is it truly though? And Mike, you answer this one. Is it truly that the politicians don't want to talk about it because they're old, or is it that there's better things to talk about? Or
well,
I can't get
I
my head around the fact that they're just afraid to talk about it.
no, I
Well, it's
think you're
two
right.
things.
It's
Yeah,
political
sure, sure.
capital, right? Yeah, it's political capital. There's only so much time on the calendar, and then I'll let Brad take it and add his opinions here. But also, I think it is. It's too embarrassing for them to talk about. It's too embarrassing to talk about the obvious fact that Biden was not ready for the job, but everyone was told by leadership, you're going to back him. And obviously, the few people who did speak out, you didn't really hear from them much anymore, right? The superdelegates pushed them out of any conversation around the primaries. So I think those, at
Right.
least in my opinion, are the two big ones.
Well, the other hurdle is that you would need a constitutional amendment to
Right.
really enact this. And
Never
pretty
getting that
hard
done.
to pass it's not impossible, but it's pretty hard to pass a constitutional amendment. So, you would need, I could look up the exact requirements, but overwhelming majorities of the states would have to ratify it,
Yep.
super majorities in Congress. It's not like putting something on the ballot in your state and getting 51% of the population to vote on it. It's a very extensive process that would be very hard to do. I actually think the public would support it, but
Yeah.
that's part of why there's the inertia there. The powers that be don't want it to happen because, like the most powerful politicians in America are the old people. So of course they're going to leverage that power to not support this kind of reform. And then the young people who would be passionate about something like this, are less far along in the career track. So they're not going to have the same kind of power in DC or in politics to enact this kind of change. And you know what? The young senator who introduced, or the member of the House who introduces a constitutional amendment to cap the age of the House of Representatives and Senate is not going to be very popular with a lot of his colleagues and is
Right.
not going
Well,
to get the best committee assignments that
Right.
term. And he might, in fact, get a primary check. Like, they
Sure.
really will not take that kind of thing well. So there's a huge logistical burden to doing it. And then there's a massive political hurdle as well. But I think if somebody made that their dying issue, the hill they're going to die on, I think they would be remembered very fondly by both sides in the long run.
So
yeah,
I think
I think it's interesting.
as we get closer to the end of our show here, there's some things I do want to talk about. I think what we do on our show here is we try to find that common ground, but I think you do the other important component is you call out both sides. That's what I love about your show, and this is an endorsement. Someone left of center frequently enjoys content like yours because it's a reality check for me, right? It's how I find if I'm being unreasonable or not, and I always appreciate your opinions on them. So tell me a little bit about maybe like two of one critique of the left and one critique of the right because I like the format of your show. You get also too as well as people to write in about their woke horror stories and things like that. So tell us a little bit about what that's been like in the last couple weeks.
Well, it's really interesting to hear from people. And one of the honors of what I do is having tens of thousands of people that regularly tune in to listen to me. Honestly, it's probably the greatest honor of my life that people, I mean, I look at my YouTube statistics and in the aggregate, I think like millions of hours of watch time
That's
in
awesome, man.
2025. That's an astounding statistic to think about if you really sit down and think about what that means. So I consider it really the honor and privilege of my life that so many people have invested a portion of their lives into listening to me and that I get to keep them company. And honestly, if it was 100 people, that would be meaningful. But the fact that it's
Yeah.
millions every month is just an honor. And I wanted to do something more two-way. So I started taking voice notes from people and I thought the a more interesting way to do that, I actually was inspired by like a trashy gossip social media influencer podcast that I listen to where they take voice notes and they give it's these two women and they give like dating advice to women and their advice seems to always be dump him and I'm like I don't know if that's always the best advice. Sometimes it's
Right.
warranted, but anyway, I want I'm like how can I engage with my audience in a way where I'll have something good to talk about as well and it will be useful for them. So I started just having them tell me crazy situations about their life. A lot of them, I will say, I criticize both sides, but definitely my biggest like eyeball grabber is my anti-woke content. That's what people
Right.
click in to see, and then I try to show them other stuff and give them other perspectives, but
Sure.
that's what people are interested in, and so I do a fair amount of that, and frankly, I think they deserve a lot of the punches I throw their way.
Right.
Um, but so it's not just their woke horror stories, but those can be very entertaining and very horrifying, actually. The things that people have had, the friends that cut them off over politics,
Right.
the horrible things that family members say to them. I mean, it is an interesting window that and I almost my inner, economics background makes me want to not say this because I know that my audience is in no way a representative sample of the American public. It's a hyper biased sample. But the two trends, and make of this what you will, in the voicemails that I get from listeners are ex family member or friend of decades won't speak to me anymore because I voted for Trump or voted differently and I'm struggling. My entire friend group ghosted me because I voted for Trump. All my like just this kind of extreme social division of cutting off relationships. And in my audience, which leans right, I haven't encountered this, but I've also actually here in West Michigan, where a lot of young people are more liberal, but their parents are hardcore Christians. I've encountered the opposite as well of like ultra MAGA people who say, if you vote for Joe Biden, you can't come home for Thanksgiving. You're supporting mass slaughter of the unborn or that kind of thing. So it's not a totally one sided phenomenon, though, with my base, my audience, it tends to be more, and I do think it's probably more pervasive at this current moment for sure. people who are left wing cutting off people who are on the right or
Sure.
vote for Trump. And then the other theme that I get is a lot of young people who fell into some kind of gender confusion and were told by guidance counselors or teachers or professors, you might be non binary, you might be trans, you might be this. And it turns out they just ended up being a feminine gay man or a masculine lesbian woman.
Sure.
And partly because of content creators like me who pushed back on some of the more socially contagious or pseudoscientific aspects of gender identity stuff and the messages that have been put out there, they didn't go into it. They didn't take hormones at 17 or go under the knife at 18 or 19. And I've gotten so many voicemails from people being like, and I'm so glad I didn't. And I
Yeah.
think that's concerning because we don't have real statistics on, like, what rates of detransition are. There is no good data because it will take a long time for it to come out for this current cohort.
Right.
You will need decades of study to really know what that number is, but and again, I don't even wanna draw real conclusions from this because my audience is so unrepresentative. It's a self-selected group of people with a specific interest in a specific political view on certain topics, but I was shocked by the numbers of young people who called in to tell me some form of my teachers or guidance counselors pushed this on me. My therapist like pushed this on me. It wasn't like I went to them and said, I think I'm trans. It's like I went to them and told them I hate my body and I have constant anxiety. And they told me, you might have gender dysphoria. Have you ever thought about being trans? And I knew that was a thing, but I guess I'm a little, I was taken aback by how much that emerged as a trend of the voice notes that got sent in. I've had probably 500 sent in at this point. I've only been doing this for a couple months, soliciting them, and those were the 2 biggest trends by far. Neither one made me feel great about the state of America, but it did make me feel great that people trusted me with, like, bearing their
Yeah.
souls like that, and that people, a lot of people seemed to get some benefit and some real just a little bit of joy out of listening to me and my content, and sometimes it helps them talk through politics or disputes with partners or family members. They both listen to it and then they talk about it, or it's just really humbling and honoring, honestly.
No, that was
That's
really
awesome, Brad.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
really inspiring, and I appreciate having voices on you and having conversations with you because it's, and, you know, another similar, person, to this kinda conversation that we're having now, we had, Brianna Wu on, I'm sure you may have heard
Mhm.
of her, yeah, so she experiences that, right? So she's not your typical Democrat or the ideologies associated with the trans community, and because of that, she's both a pariah to many on the left and the right, and, you know, I feel this similarly, myself sometimes. I'm firmly left of center, but you know, sometimes when you talk about national security or trade policies, things like that, I'm a blasphemer amongst the left. Or if I like push the idea that no, like Israel may be doing the wrong things, but like let's not conflate, what Hamas is and what the Israeli government is. They're two different things. And then I'm sure you feel this too as a gay Republican, right? There's certain camps and factions that immediately want to purity test you or criticize you. So again, thank you for helping us curate this space where different peoples of opinions and whatnot can come together and just have an open conversation.
Yeah,
Brad,
thank you
where can people
guys.
find your show?
Anywhere you get podcasts, check out Brad versus Everyone, or on YouTube, just search for Brad Polumbo. Thank you guys so much for having me on and for the conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, man. We're really grateful. So I'm going to link all your shows in the bottom here so people can go check it out. And hey, this has been Elevated Thoughts. Thanks, Brad.